Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. It's not uncommon to hear from those on an evolutionary path that waking up caused problems in their relationships with partners and loved ones who couldn't embrace their new interests. But that's not what happened to today's guest, Patricia Albere, who in fact found that she could have a mutual awakening. And that was quite something groundbreaking in Patricia's experience. To have an awakening experience with another individual is a very rare event. A recognized leader and innovator in the emerging field of post-personal development, Patricia Albere is author of the best-selling book, Evolutionary Relationships, Unleashing the Power of Mutual Awakening. She's also the founder of the Evolutionary Collective, which is helping people find and transform any committed relationship with a spouse, lover, friend, or family member into a dynamic engine for mutual evolution. We'll find out more about that after we've discussed the 10 books that influenced Patricia the most on her spiritual journey. Patricia Albere, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here.
Now, you've said that, like most of us, your 10 favourite books change as you and the world evolve. The ones that we are going to be looking at now are the most recent 10 best books in your experience. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, good. So tell us a little bit about your experience with books in general and what it was like for you to have to cull your list down to just 10.
Okay. But this is a funny thought flashed. I'm a baby boomer, and I loved reading as a child. I could read very young, and my mom would take me to the library every week. And I remember they gave you a thing. It was a tree, and then there were golden apples for like every book you read, which is a really smart thing to do for children because they're both, they both want to like put the apples on the tree and read the books. So for me, I've read my whole life and love it, and have probably, read, given away a million books, bought more. There's been a constant exchange. So
When would you say that you read your first spiritual book?
Pretty young. I mean, I was 18 when I found Autobiography of a Yogi. Mm-hmm. And of course,
and that did it for you?
Well, and Seth Speaks, because that was what was happening then, right? So, yeah, I mean, I just was fascinated with, I've traveled a lot. I grew up in New York, so it wasn't some isolated sort of farm experience where, I'd never been anywhere, but not a farm experience, but, like living in a small town and not leaving until I was 20 something. It was the other world. Do you know what I mean? Like I never was a big novel reader. It was really spiritual, different kinds of spiritual work that was really fascinating to me.
Yeah, reading about other people's experiences as well. Yeah.
And also just as possible. I mean, if anything, I'm the most hungry for that what we think is possible here is a joke. So I'm much more about like, wait a minute, what?
What if?
What did you say, and what about the ascended masters and the various things? I mean, I loved Biography of Yogi as an 18-year-old girl who is obviously, still a little obsessed with how you look, and that he lost like 20 pounds overnight, like at one point, which jumped out to me like, oh my God, that's a miracle.
Yeah. Yeah. We can do that.
More. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Okay. So your first book on your list is one that you recommend for anyone who wants to know why democracy seems to be crumbling or understand the forces creating the chaos we find ourselves in. And it is one of my favorites too. It's The 9 Waves of Creation, Quantum Physics, Holographic Evolution, and the Destiny of Humanity by Carl Calleman, PhD. And it was published in 2016. And what did you like so much about Carl's book?
Well, Carl had discovered me before I discovered him. I'm in one of the chapters. He actually recommends mutual awakening as a 9th wave practice, very, very, very highly. And I was experiencing what he was writing about. So when he contacted me, I immediately bought the book. And I was just like, how someone gives language to things that you and the other people in the collective, the 150, 200 people that I'm working very deeply with, it was reflecting our experience completely.
Yeah, and I was blown away by that book. Yeah.
It was. I mean, and I still have all my students read it. I think the distinctions, one of the things that books give us is they give us more refined ways to understand things.
Yes.
So just like if you and I were doctors, we'd have to have a very refined understanding of the body and the thing, and like so many things in order to really know what's going on. And I find spiritual books that are in the line that I'm at least pursuing, these evolutionary perspective. If you can have greater context and discernment, then you can really begin to follow something that is not so obvious. I mean, everybody knows meditation is good. Everybody knows, working on your shadow. And, there's a million things that have a lot of agreement at this point. But there are things that people are not listening to that are in an entirely different paradigm. It's in a different category.
I mean, I found that book quite unique. I mean, some of the information in there was like, whoa, it really was.
Yeah.
Was there anything that really stood out for you?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think anyone who is wondering, pardon my French, what the hell is going on, right? When you look into the world and you're like, what is going on? What is going on? That book, his research and his work gives you this panorama of oh, I get it. There's a big enough view. People tend to be very myopic. What's happening to me and how do I feel and how can I feel better? It's like something way vaster, but then you can begin to find yourself in it and become more aligned with that which is lifting humanity, not the part of humanity that is falling apart.
Yeah.
And that couldn't be more important.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that really stuck out in my mind was, I interviewed him about the whole trilogy of books. And, back in something like 2015, I think. And I remember him talking The Global Mind. He was writing about that. And I remember him making a prediction. And he's been writing his predictions based on the Mayan calendar. And this one was that we were coming to the end of the 400-year-long night. And we are going to see all the power in the world move to the east. And I thought, okay, well, what's that going to look like? Right. And then in this particular book, there was something he talked about the corpus callosum. He talked about the tree of life, and he painted this picture of east and west and left brain, right brain. Right. And he started talking about, what we find in, religious thought and all kinds of things and how it differs in the East than it does the West. And I suddenly began to see a whole other strand to what he'd said about the power going to the East, because I was thinking geopolitics. But what he was also painting out was about, you look at what we've had from the East with, spirituality, far earlier than the West, and Eastern spirituality, Eastern mythology, etc. And he talked about how much of that had arisen in the East as opposed to the West. And then I looked at how meditation, how spirituality is really coming to the forefront. It's becoming almost mainstream now. And I thought, I wonder whether that's what he's alluding to. All the power is going to the East. Not necessarily about geopolitics, but it's about,
a little bit of both. But basically, all the religions are embedded in a very old wave. So the answers are not in the religions, the practices, the protocols that arose 6,000 years ago. It was heavily patriarchally designed. Who says a woman would have invented meditation? So I don't think, even though, yes, there was a wave of that, there's a wave of women being empowered. That's in the 8th wave that he discusses. But that's not what I'm working in a different realm, because there's something coming from the future that if we don't listen, the solutions are there, not in the past, not in technology, not in co-creating and everybody meeting and trying to figure out what to do with the world. There's something that if we can just pay attention together, there are new solutions, new potentials, and new kinds of consciousness that we can achieve.
Well, we'll talk about that a bit later after we've finished the list, when we start talking about the evolutionary collective. Let's move on to book 2, which is Transcending the Levels of Consciousness, The Stairway to Enlightenment by David Hawkins. And that was published in 2006.
Yeah, he wrote a lot of different books. I think came from, he was obviously a PhD and an MD and kind of a wild, awake guy, but, I'm sure he wasn't everybody's cup of tea, but he was definitely a very awake man. And my experience was, when you work with people on their individual, issues and lives, that book, Transcending the Levels of Consciousness, gives you clarity as far as going from despair, which would be close to, it's like levels, close to wanting to kill yourself, to enlightenment. So it's kind of like 0 to 1,000. And the knowledge base that's in there pops out, like, what's the view of the person that you're dealing with? So if someone is rooted, so you understand what these levels are, and then it starts to change when you get over 200. And I found that teaching that within the context of this post-personal way of working, it really is illuminative. Somebody who's in fear and you try to work with them, they just keep convincing you that it's scary, because they're coming from a level of consciousness that doesn't have another option.
So how do you work with them?
Well, I don't actually. There are therapists, there are people that are trained to move people from, really some of the much lower levels of just being embedded in your own pain, and, you can't get out of it. And there are people that are geniuses at that. That's not my gift. But above 200 makes a difference, because people in pride are usually pretty successful people, but they don't listen. I'm good with them. Because people think just because they're successful, they won't listen, they're uncoachable. There's a ceiling that they hit. And if they don't move into willingness and some of these higher, pathways to a more awakened consciousness, you just can't do anything with them. And there's a lot of spiritual pride going around. So it's good to know. I found it useful.
Good. So book 3, a book you wished you'd read when you were 15. I love the title, Seductress, Women Who Ravished the World and Their Lost Art of Love, by Betsy Priolo.
Very similar simply, and she's a professor, I believe, at one of the New York universities. She wrote it in such a great way. And, most young women are insecure and perfectionists and looking to be reflected, from opposite, whoever their partner would be, or men or women. And she was so great because she just kept going, like like, you're too much, you're told, oh, that's very masculine, and you're like going, no, not necessarily, like, or you're too old, or you're too this, or you're not attractive enough. And all of those things are shot through and through when you read this, and you realize these amazing women had, at least this is a heterosexual thing, they had men, wrapped around their fingers that were running, empires. And it just makes it all go away. You're like, okay, my feet are too big. Are you kidding? So it's really good. It's a good one.
She chooses very juicy, seductive titles for her book. I mean, she wrote one called Swoon, Great Seducers and Why Women Love Them, and Diamonds and Deadlines.
No, they're really good. And she's obviously a great teacher, so she knows how to tell the story. But it's liberating. I mean, if I had a daughter, I happen to have a son, I just read it with her, because it just expunges all the nonsense that we believe has to limit us. And I do think it's important.
So book 4 is the name above the title, an autobiography by Frank Capra, the creator and director of what is very likely the world's most favorite film, It's a Wonderful Life. So what was it about this book that inspired you?
Funny, when I worked for Werner Erhard, who created the Landmark Forum and the various things, when I was 20. And I always loved old movies. I've watched so many old movies, in the course of life. And I love Frank Capra because he did The Name of a, he did a lot of different movies, not just, this Christmas movie. And so I was inspired by him. I found the book. And when I read it, I realized that his life was a Frank Capra movie. And there's an incident in the just tell it really briefly because it's so good. It was after he won the Academy Award for something, and he just got scared, and he was just like, oh my God, I can't do another one. And, what am I going to do? And so he said, I'm such a good director. I directed temperature to go down or up. And then he started getting really, really ill. So he was actually in the hospital, not well at all. And one of his friends came to visit him, who was a Christian Scientist. And, he was laying in his bed, and the guy comes in with his friend, and he says, can we talk to you for a moment? He goes, sure. And he said, no, my friend wants you to put your robe on and come to the other room. And he's like, okay. So he goes in there, and there's a radio. And this is the time, this is right around, when Hitler was doing what he was doing. And the guy just ripped him. He just said, Mr. Capra, you have been given a God's given gift to speak to millions of people in the dark. Do you hear that, man? He says, how dare you squander your gift? And then they walked out. And that's Frank Capra. That is a Frank Capra scene if I ever saw one. And he literally walked in the room, put his clothes on, went home, and then won, I think, another Academy Award, and started devoting himself to the war effort and doing as much as he could to make films, etc., whatever he could do to actually try to turn the tide. So, and then I wrote him a letter, and he wrote me back. And, I just think he's a very special director and man.
Wonder why nobody's ever made a film about him then.
No, he was a trip. Like when you read the book, he was, Italian, came over, he had lots of different barriers and things, but he is a Frank Capra movie. It's
a very hard book to get hold of. I mean, copies are going for quite a lot of money on Amazon.
Yeah, it's not in production anymore.
Yeah,
But
shame.
I had to mention it because it was just such a favorite, and he was so special.
So was it that you enjoyed it so much, or was there something in there that really inspired you?
Well, for me, just as my sort of storyline, I love Pollyanna. I have like this sort of wanting to inspire the world, and those old movies where like the grouchy old man and Shirley Temple would get together, and she would get under his skin and change it all, and so I really had that. And then when I met Werner when I was 18, I felt like it was kind of part of that movie was to be very young and to be placed on a particular level of stage, and being with people where I could inspire them to the possibilities of their own lives, possibility of life. And so I felt like one of those characters.
Okay, so book number 5, quite different
Okay.
book, Expecting Adam, A True Story of Birth, Rebirth, and Everyday Magic by Martha Beck, published in 1999.
Yeah. I just, Martha, I mean, she wasn't on any of Oprah's stuff, that's for sure. So, like in the 90s, and got this book, and it's so well written. She has like 3 law degrees or 3 degrees at Harvard. She's very funny, and very, very touching. And she wrote about her Down syndrome baby, and then her relationship with Harvard, and the Mormons. She had parents that were Mormons, but there was this magical thing going on between her and the baby. And her experience having a Down syndrome child called Adam, is hysterical. Like the things she shares, the way people reacted, what she went through. And I remember giving it to a Hollywood friend who I said, "You've got to make a movie on this. This is like a great movie." And she tried to get the ownership rights to it, but I think Gloria Steinem has them.
So, I mean, what was the standout thing that you remember most about that book?
Well, first, it was just so well written. It made me literally laugh and cry and just be like, oh my God, I wish I could write like her. But it was just this validation of following something deeper than her Harvard was telling her to do. And then little Adam with her, she ended up having, I think, 2 other kids, was just himself and just this magical being that, looked funny, to other people, and it would break her heart when people would treat him differently. But she really, she let him be this this being that he is. Just as a mother also, I was just, so inspired by her acceptance, and then just her celebration of just what a wild little character he was. So yeah.
So book 6 is the I Ching or the I Ching workbook by R.L. Wing, published in 1978. You still throw the coins from time to time.
I do. I mean, there are times where you just want to get a feeling of some kind of direction, and your head's going to get in the way. And I like the way it's written. I appreciate the I Ching for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah, why this particular one? I mean, there's been so many books written about it.
I don't know. I just like, it's more like a workbook. I like the shape of it. I like, the way it works. It's not like it's like a 8 by 11 book. It's just a personal preference, like.
Yeah. Book 7, Facets of Unity: The Enneagram of Holy Ideas by A.H. Almas, published in 1998.
Yeah, A.H. Almas was one of my teachers. So for 8 years, I was a part of the Diamond Heart School, and he's so awake, this man. he was in Boulder one time, and they were interviewing him at the front of the room, at Europa. And somebody asked him, like, what's your experience of your body? And without skipping a beat, because he's kind of like, you tell he's more than just human somehow. He says it's like a black hole. And it was just a slide by. Like, I don't even know how many people listened to him, but I was just like, I so get that. So it was, so this particular book, I studied the Enneagram. I have a mastery class that I used to do. And the Enneagram is, I think many people know, it's a typology that was downloaded by Gurdjieff and others to understand the design of people. And it's very accurate, the design of anything, like even New York City has an Enneagram type. And I studied it very, very, very deeply. But his particular book was really about the holy ideas. So you can have a pathological, let's say if you're a certain type, you can be the pathological version, and you can be the completely, connected to enlightenment version. And they exist on a scale. So that particular book is very inspiring.
And is that at the same time? You can have both at the same time, and it really depends which you're expressing or which direction you go?
Well, the direction matters, but if you're getting healthier, you move out of the different levels of pathology. So like, well, I probably shouldn't get political, but Donald Trump and many other strongman leaders are type 8. And one of the things that's useful to know about type 8s is, they want, you can see how they want to take over and they're doing all this stuff. But basically, if it looks like they're going down, Putin's an 8 too, they will take the world with them. And if you don't know that, it's very scary. I mean, they were literally like, okay, if I'm going to die, everybody's going to die. So knowing what the pathological version is, Martin Luther King was an 8. So he was a very awakened, enlightened, in service to the world 8. And they're charismatic, and they're charismatic and very powerful. So when you understand that whole system, it's kind of interesting. But this particular focus is not on all the personality traits, but holy love. Like, it's where does the whole thing literally come from?
Yeah. So you mentioned the diamond something?
Yeah, H. Almas is a teacher, and he has something called the diamond approach. And I did that for a number of years. Yeah.
What is that?
People can Google it. It's a beautiful individual school. It's really well done. Of being able to work on yourself and become awakened. I kind of got to the end of it because it was just so process oriented. It was just like, okay, I don't want to look under every rock. I don't think that's really where the future is wanting to take me. So kind of let it go about, a long time ago.
So book number 8, The Mother by Sri Aurobindo, who's written so many books. And it's hard to find an exact date for publication, but it looks like it was around 1972, I think.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, that's the littlest book. So if anyone buys that, usually it's about $5, and it's literally like 4 inches square and like that thick. Right? It's like nothing. Which Sri Aurobindo's books are usually like that thick and impossible to read. But this particular book, back to the theme of being empowering the feminine, empowering women. He goes through in that because he loved the mother. He definitely celebrated the divine feminine. But it's so clear. Like, I remember having some thought leader man tell me, I was like sort of like Jesus in the temple. I was one of those, wait a minute, no, like wielding a sword in that particular moment. And he goes, oh, you're so masculine. And I literally, I could feel something like rise up and go, you have no idea. You have no idea who the divine feminine is and what we have access to, when we do. I mean, they exploding, changing, it's just like you are out of your mind if you think that, the power that flows through us doesn't have the same potency. And this book is so good when it describes the 4 powers of the mother. I've read it, probably 15, 20 times just to remind myself of the divine access to who I am, not the personality access that, normal men are so interested in. Because who
Book
wants
number
a normal?
9? Yeah. Book number 9, The Grand Option, Personal Transformation and a New Creation by Beatrice Brutto, published in 2001. And you say that she's a visionary in her own right. Tell us about her.
Well, yeah, to some degree. I mean, she was a student of Teilhard
de Chardin, yeah.
And she wrote lots of books about his work. So she was quite a student, aficionado of, his particular work. And I found that this particular book was, if I had to recommend one of her books, this is the most useful. So if you're interested in that sort of, again, back to like Carl, seeing the future. Now, Teilhard could only see the noosphere. He could only see the thinking layer of the earth and, certain things there and maybe just a tiny bit more. But, I think he died in the 60s or 70s. I mean, he had a far range. So it is interesting to see what he saw and to have education around that. And now what we're doing is kind of looking further.
Yeah. Yeah. You said you were overjoyed with the resonance and alignment you felt with his vision of evolution. It's
kind of finding your patrons, it's like finding the ones who actually would, like, if they were alive, they'd be like, yeah, like keep going. They would be celebrating what we're hearing, and what we're feeling.
And your 10th book, Hilma af Klint, Paintings for the Future by Tracy Bashkoff. That was published in 2018. I am not familiar with Hilma af Klint, so tell me about her.
Google her. She's pretty interesting. She, in the 1890s until her death in 1944, she did not want her work shown because she said it was for the future. Do you know what I mean? It was like people wouldn't get it. And she was friends with Blavatsky and, a bunch of the people that were in the late 1890s. She was the first, there's something, I can't remember which ones, but so as a woman, in 1906, she started painting abstractly before Kandinsky, before Mondrian and others. So she was before them as far as getting the future. And her paintings are amazing and fabulous. And she even has evolution in it somewhere. And so for me also, again, back to women who are forerunners that don't get any credit for anything, which I don't think she cared. Kandinsky and those guys got credit for kind of Marxist work. So she was amazing. And then 28 years later, when they showed her work, I think at the Guggenheim and some other places, people were just blown away.
Yeah. Apparently it says that the paintings for the temple were works that were envisioned to be housed in a round building where visitors would progress upward along a spiraling path on a spiritual journey defined by her paintings. Do you have that experience when you look at them?
A la the Guggenheim. She envisioned the Guggenheim.
Oh.
Because you walk up and you go in a spiral and they were literally put there. She envisioned it.
Wow. So do you think it was built because she'd envisioned it? It inspired someone else, or that was just her, prophetic?
No, there are people, I mean, I have a number of different sort of significant people in my family that were on the edge of the edge of the edge in the beginning of things. My middle name's Duryea, and the Duryea brothers created the first automobile company in New York. I mean, in America. It wasn't Ford. Now, they didn't make it big, but they basically created something before there were any cars. So when you have a vision, and we've seen so many people, and they're really like, they're listening to something different than what the rest of the world is listening to. I love those people. I want to do anything that I can to support the future continuing to come in, instead of everybody's like repeating the same things and, doing the same things and visiting, the same churches and the thing, and it's as if like back to Aurobindo, it's almost like the divine feminine going, seriously, do you really think that I gave everything like 6,000 years ago and then you're just going to repeat it forever? Seriously.
So are you...
Creation is way bigger than putting something in a series of quadrants or, a certain set of rituals of sameness.
Well, you hear about so many books where somebody has written about something that happens, decades later, exactly as they wrote about it. Somebody was at the beginning of COVID. Somebody was sending around, I can't remember who's, a passage from a book that actually predicted, exactly. And the name of the, the whole virus as well. Are you familiar with PMA Chatwater's work? She wrote a great book called Future Memory. She's had experiences of the future through her near-death experiences. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Very.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, whatever that is, that's what the people I'm working with are getting better and better at being in alignment with and listening to and surrendering to. Because if you have people that are doing the same things that they did in 1950, you're going to have the same world.
Yeah.
You need people that have courage and kind of listening to those funny edges and trying to like literally allow themselves to align with something that is not familiar, that isn't the same. And that's always a small percentage of people. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's now talk about your work, as we're moving in that direction anyway. Your book, Evolutionary Relationships, Unleashing the Power of Mutual Awakening. I mean, this draws on more than 4 decades of your teaching work, helping people find and transform their committed relationships. Tell us, what is an evolutionary relationship and why do we need them?
Okay. So let me just clarify, I wrote that book 6 years ago, I guess, it's not about relationships. Believe it or not, when you read the whole book, yes, it has some pointers and advice, but really shared unity, what I teach people in the mutual awakening part of it, the shared unity is to go into a spiritual practice where you reliably enter into shared oneness.
Which is something you've experienced.
Yeah, well, I spent 4 years in that with a particular partner, that sort of gripped us and wouldn't let go. We were being undone in a way that allowed us to be inside this quality of oneness, period. It didn't break. And most relationships are between separatenesses. If you're a really relationship expert, you know how to take this one and have them listen to each other and be more compassionate and attuned and stuff. But this one's over here and this one's over here. And what I'm doing is literally having people like turn in a certain way, and they literally they slip into a deeper oneness where they're both like going, yeah, like they can experience it. And it's not my imagination. It's not yours. We're actually kind of in, and then I go, look over there. What do you see? And we're like, yeah, we see the same thing. There's things that begin to download, and oneness is below difference, and what color you are and what kind of religion you're studying. It's like it's deeper and deeper. And when you really get there with another person, there's a kind of being in love, even if you don't like them. You don't actually have to like. Sometimes we're in love with people we don't even like, but it's something on such a deeper foundation of like circuitry. It's like there's a wider circuitry in unity that when you begin to access that, everything starts to actually change, and you feel not alone. And there's also a sense of home. People constantly say that. I don't say anything. They learn how to practice and they go, I feel like I'm home. I feel like I'm home.
Which is what everybody's looking for.
That's what I think. That's what I've always been looking for. To be home and to be seen, to be so connected that you really can't not see them. It's something like you can't not see the divinity, the particularity of that particular human being, and that gets more illuminated. And as you can imagine, as that happens, you get seener. A lot of what we're looking for is look at me, listen to me, you don't get me, you never did get me, hello, I'm here. And when you're actually rooted in that quality of deeply being seen, and then I teach something called spondic love, which has to do with being in, with, and for. So you're really not just seeing them, but you're actually, there's like a level of circuitry that you're sharing, that you're for each other. And that's part of the nature of the consciousness. And that's the other thing we're missing. Like, how many people, do you really think you have 1 million people at your back? When someone starts to be selfish, everything goes away. We've been betrayed by the people we love the most.
How did you develop the practice for mutual awakening, and how is it different from other practices?
Well, first, it comes from the shared unity. It doesn't come from an individual enlightenment.
Yeah.
I didn't go into a cave and shut my eyes. So it's utterly different as far as that goes. And the source of it is more love, not just consciousness. It was easy to teach. It was actually pretty easy to teach. You need the commitment of people, which is the hard part.
Was it easy to develop?
Yeah, because I have the transmission. 4 years of living inside something extraordinary. And then he died. Just so people know the reason why he's not here.
That must have been very challenging,
to put it mildly.
Yeah, I'm sure.
It was horrifying. But then I realized too, I didn't start teaching it right away at all. It took about 12 or 13 years. Basically, I didn't realize until later that it was an idea whose time has come. That closing your eyes individually, constantly working on your subjective self and how do I feel and what's my root chakra doing, and you're sort of like in this bubble. I've done that. I mean, I've done that with thousands and thousands of people, and it was kind of like, it's over. Like, I can't teach that anymore. And there's more power and speed and joy in when we're together. Something starts and we're with each other. We're not just like focusing on ourselves. There's something that more rapidly seems to purify. Really different.
Barbara Marx Hubbard said that the mutual awakening practice is a vital evolutionary necessity for the quantum jump that's imminent when we humans are connected as a whole at the proper scale. Tell me how it might transform our lives.
Well, It does. I mean, the people who embrace it and who actually want to do the work to actually learn the practice in a very real way, which, isn't everybody. But when people do that, they're like, I wouldn't be anywhere else. Do you know what I mean? Like the immediacy of presence. You can feel a little crazy. Maybe you watch the news and you get on and you're like, I'm very uninspired right now. And within moments, because of the presence of what is there when we practice together online. So we have global teachings, every day, a couple times a day. It just somehow all of a sudden, like, boom, you're there. And then as you practice, everything starts to unfold even deeper. And you just feel nourished and like you're home. And I don't know. I mean, if nothing else, it helps us, at least it helps me to be able to deal with life every day. Because the world is very strange right now. So there's like an extra need I have to be with people who have integrity, who are wholehearted, who want to give, not just take, and then know how to do this so we can go places.
Yeah, well, I mean, you talk a lot about creating the we space rather than the me space. And let's face it, there's an awful lot of me space going on in the world right now.
That's true. And it's
so
kind of, it's also rewarding. I mean, if you study brain stuff, if you constantly focus on yourself, you actually don't get better. This produces gamma rays. It actually activates both sides of the brain, and you're looking out, you're looking, there's something that is so much more supercharged and healthy. Even, if the brain people, looked at the waves, it's a very different thing to have your eyes open and be using both sides of the brain.
So can anyone do this? Can anyone, join the collective? What happens if they don't have a partner, if they're a single person? Are they going to find?
Yeah, no partners needed.
No partners needed.
Yeah, so the course, we do a 4-week course where 2 weeks during the 4 weeks, people get on the global platform with the other people from around the world who do know what they're doing, right? Who know how to go there. So they get to be more initiated by the space of people that are, dedicated and really inside this. And then if they want to join global, then they can join global. And then they have access to, once or twice a day, getting on if they want to. So you just go, oh, it's Wednesday, it's this time, I think I'll get on. And we send the links, and, so it's a very convenient way. You don't need a partner. You'll actually be probably nicer to your partner because you have people to go deep with.
Yeah.
So you're not looking for things that sometimes you can't get from your partner.
So what kind of results have you seen in, what is it, 13 years or more you've been doing this?
Well, the global and teaching mutual awakening has been the last 4 or 5 years. So I was working with a deeper group of people prior to that, and that's kind of a different conversation. Here's a number of things. So people want to go into flow states, no problem. So spontaneity, loss of that self-reflective self-talk, which is so unconstructive. Be nice about it. So a lot of that starts to go away. People feel spontaneous. They feel like they can say what they want to say. There's a kind of sense of flow, which is very, very useful. The other thing is people sometimes just cry because they literally, as they go deeper and they have that feeling of home, Sandie, it's like you realize how you're kind of thirsty all the time. You don't even realize how alone, or how, you could have a million friends, but just this feeling of, and all the spiritual work is write in your journal and close your eyes. And, there's just this loneliness. And to experience the divine together is the greatest glory. It's like, we're both there and we're going, we're literally falling into the sacred together. Like, it doesn't get better than that. I mean, at least, it's like, and then we're there and you're like, we're sharing it and it's deepening and we're sharing it and there's more blessings and it just feels so wonderful. So those are some of the changes.
Well, let's just go back to your list before we end.
Okay.
If you could have dinner with any one of those authors on your list, who would you pick?
If I could talk to them?
If you could have dinner with them, yeah.
Oh, dinner. Okay. Dinner's even better. Hilma. I would want to talk to Hilma.
Because?
Well, number one, she's an artist, so she has a particular access to this future that I also feel I have a certain connection to. And I just want to know, like, in those 1890s, like, what was it like? What was she hearing? What was she seeing? What were her friends? Like what was the reality that they were in the midst of?
Yeah.
I would really, really want to do that with her.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, final question. What are you reading now?
I'm reading. So I was given a book by one of my friends for my birthday, which is another hard to find. I think it was a library copy or something, but it's about Lucretia Mott. And Lucretia Mott was one of those relatives. So in the 1830s to the 1890s, she was an abolitionist and lived in Philadelphia. And she was a teacher of a Quaker teacher. And she was pretty famous back in the 19th century. And she was so pure. So she's related to me. I have like a Mott Bible back there. And she just spoke. She didn't care who she was talking to, men, women, it was like she just was fiercely connected to divine. And she really felt like it wasn't political. None of those things were. It was as the divine wanted us to be, which was to have an equal say, to have some of the various things, and also not to be so materialistic. That we were going off in the wrong directions by being so obsessed with, gold and money and power. And I just, the more I read about her, and her husband supported her, and she helped create Swarthmore College, and she made a big difference in the world. But I only found her 6 months ago. I found some papers that my mom had somewhere, and I was just like, I could feel her. I feel like I feel Lucretia. I absolutely feel her. So I am just having, and also her great grandfather helped negotiate the deal to buy Nantucket. So there's also this sort of, connection to Nantucket that I would like to just go there and kind of see how that feels. But yeah, so she's totally exciting to me.
And that's in your DNA.
Apparently so. I mean, that's what I felt. I felt like, oh, now I get it. Why I have such a kind of, and they called her a heretic. And I have sometimes called myself a heretic, of a certain sort. But yeah, anyway.
Patricia Albere, thank you so much for adding your 10 best list to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations.
Thank you.
So, Evolutionary Relationships, Unleashing the Transformative Power of Mutual Awakening by Patricia Albere is published by Oracle Institute Press. And for more information about the book, the Evolutionary Collective, and Patricia, visit evolutionarycollective.com. And I think you've got a free self-paced introduction to the Mutual Awakening e-course. And that's available at evolutionarycollective.com/intro. So do check it out. That's it for this week. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and I'll be back at the same time next week with another 10 best interview for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. Till then, it's goodbye from me. And thank you to Patricia Albere.
Thank you so much, Sandie.